Hi, I'm Richard Stiennon. I'm a industry analyst that covers the cybersecurity space, and welcome to this panel where we're going to be talking about zero trust and workload protection, basically. And on this panel, we have Rich Campagna, who is the Senior VP of Cloud Protection at Zscalar. We've got Satyam Tyagi, who is the Senior Director of Products at ColorTokens. And we've got Alex Esibov, who is the Senior Program Manager at Microsoft for security. So, gentlemen, welcome. Good to see you here. Yeah, so Rich, why don't we start with you? How'd you get into your role, and what's Zscalar's approach to cloud protection, basically?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Richard. So, as you pointed out, Senior Vice President of Cloud Protection here at Zscalar. How I got into this role, who knows? A long kind of storied career in technology in various different spaces, but I spent about the last decade working with cloud applications in the CASB space and now in the cloud workload protection space. So, most people listening to this probably know Zscalar, and you probably know that our whole business is built on zero trust concepts. Most of Zscalar's business, at least what we're known for in the past, has been around things like secure user to internet access and secure user access to private applications, both built on these solid zero trust fundamentals and a what we call our zero trust exchange, which is our globally distributed cloud platform. Over the last couple of years, we've been working to extend many of those same concepts and principles to cloud workloads, right? So whether it's regardless of where these workloads are living, anywhere in the public cloud or really in the data center as well, for that matter, or private cloud types of environments. We've taken many of the same concepts and foundations that we learned from applying zero trust to the user world and brought those over to the cloud workload world. So whether it's providing app-to-app connectivity, whether it's doing things like identity-based microsegmentation, or whether it's providing secure application access to the internet, all of those kind of foundational, security strategies for cloud workload protection are built around zero trust in the Zscalar portfolio.
Cool. And just help me understand, is it a new use case for the existing, Zscalar private access or internet access, or is it a new product line if somebody needs to protect their cloud workloads?
Yeah, great question. The answer is that it's both. Over the last year or two, we've been making acquisitions and building organically for this new business model for the company and for our customers. So we've made a couple of acquisitions in the realm of zero trust cloud workload protection. I'll point out for example, is our identity-based microsegmentation platform, which is very much about applying zero trust to cutting down on lateral threat movement inside of a cloud environment. And so what that does is it uniquely identifies all the software running in a cloud environment, which is kind of one of the core principles around zero trust is identifying all entities that are attempting to communicate on a network. And then it uses that concept of identity and normal or desired communication patterns to automatically microsegment a network and only allow authorized software that is secure to make communications on a network. So that is, that came into our portfolio by an acquisition last year of a company called Edgewise Networks. But at the same time, we've been working quite a bit on organic development and extending the products known as Zscalar Internet Access and Zscalar Private Access to cloud workloads. And the incremental product bit there is connectors in these facilities for connecting VPCs or VNets or anything running in your public cloud environment for plumbing that back into what we call the Zero Trust Exchange, which is our cloud platform. So that's a little bit of new technology and a little bit of existing technology in that case.
Okay, now that helps. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And Satyam, tell us how you got to ColorTokens and what ColorTokens' approach is to cloud workload protection.
Hey, Richard. Thank you for inviting us to this panel. Super excited to be here. I have been in security for well over 20 years. Started in more like leading a exploit research lab That's the nice way to put it.
Yeah.
And getting into security products, building products in operating system security, Samsung Knox type of products came from my team earlier. And now I am super excited to be here at ColorTokens. Where we have taken a zero trust approach, where we typically used to have that in operating systems with mandatory access control and high assurance environments. We are bringing that to the whole enterprise, to their cloud and those environments. There was this fundamental belief in traditional security that, hey, you can trust your infrastructure, you can trust your networks, you can trust your workforce, you can trust that you are secure enough with a good perimeter and a solid perimeter security. That has fundamentally changed. And we at ColorTokens believe that the only way forward to have a good good cybersecurity environment is through a zero trust approach. And that's kind of how, on the premise that ColorTokens is founded, we have built a very strong zero trust platform fundamentally. And based on that is where we have built different products on top of that platform. And one of the key products in that area is the cloud workload protection products. And it uses and leverages the power of the platform, which solves three key challenges in zero trust. So I think right now in the industry, there is very good acceptance that zero trust is the right way, but there are several challenges to actually implement it. There is a lot of products out there who are trying to do zero trust, and a lot of, not even products, sometimes processes and technology teams who are trying to work that in. But the challenges like how do you do it at scale? How do you do it in a cloud native environment? How do you ensure that it doesn't disrupt your applications and doesn't disrupt your normal business function? When you go to this least privilege and tight policies, you have always that fear. And then finally, how do you even measure that you have done a good job or you have done okay? It's unlike a threat-based environment or a EDR or a vulnerability scanner where you have very specific outputs. It's very hard to measure how good you are doing at zero trust. So we have built capabilities around that fundamentally in the platform. And on top of that, we have built the workload protection solution.
And Alex, tell us, about your role at Microsoft. Then obviously Microsoft probably has a few workloads of its own to protect. So tell us what you're doing there.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So I probably have the most untraditional path into cybersecurity here. My background's in biomedical engineering, and I was working on defibrillation and designing the next-gen defibrillator. And I was watching the first defibrillator we had connect to the internet. And we were starting to explore problems like, what if somebody hacks into this thing and then makes it not deliver a shock when it should, or deliver a shock when it shouldn't? And this world started to fascinate me. So I made the pivot over to Microsoft, and now I run sort of the secure access program on the Cloud Access Security Broker solution, or MCAS, Cloud App Security at Microsoft. So I think the workload question is a really interesting one. 10 years ago, no one brought up the word workload, and everyone cared about apps, and we were sitting on our corporate network and there were apps. And now we have to protect all of these workloads, and of course apps are still a part of that, but there's all the underlying code underneath and all the VMs that are running. And this challenge just shows how important it is to manage this all with a consistent and sort of seamless set of properties and of tools. And I think that's what I'm enjoying so much about Microsoft right now is when we started, for example, we started talking about data, which is, of course, one of the most important things to protect. And that's why we're protecting these workloads in the first place. And we were applying labels and encryption to data inside of applications. And we realized, hey, we should apply these exact same concepts to SQL servers on premise. And we should create this one global product that understands data regardless of where it is, and applies data and applies all those same controls to it, regardless of what your workload is. So I think that's what I'm enjoying so much about this challenge of workload security is, as it's sort of growing in scope to what a workload is, finding those same patterns and principles and ways to apply policies and rules, regardless of where the resource ultimately is.
Yeah, you brought up cloud access, security brokers, CASB. And I'd like to dig into the difference between the types of, even access controls we've had in the past, and then the actual protection of, I don't care if it's a full desktop computer or a VM or a Kubernetes container. It's an endpoint, it's got to be protected. And there are tons of solutions for doing that, right? There's little file integrity monitoring things. There's a couple of guys out there that will use moving target defense, where they just rebuild the things constantly, so you can't actually pin them down to hack them. But how does Zero Trust security play into protecting workloads? So we'll start with you, Alex.
Yeah, I'll start, and then of course I'll hand it over to the other folks on the call as well. It's a really interesting question. So like you brought up CASBs, so I'll sort of state that I think it's really interesting that for so long we've been able to survive in these silos of different products, and I think those barriers are finally starting to come down. Like a few years ago, it's a while ago now, but somebody said a CASB is this thing that discovers resources and applies protection via inline and out of band controls to these set of sanctioned applications and some amount of unsanctioned apps. And everybody kind of then nodded their heads and said, yep, that makes sense. And we built all these sort of product definitions and silos. And now I think the workload piece is the interesting piece, because it's one of the things that's creating this conversation of we can't continue to operate inside of these silos. Like when we're talking about protecting a workload, it starts all the way at writing the code and creating like all the processes for actually shipping that code, right? So Rich brought up acquisitions, and like the GitHub acquisition for Microsoft was a super interesting one to me, because it was sort of that realization of let's back all the way up to actually writing this code, and let's figure out how we shift left all of our policies, how we start looking for exploits in open source that users might be doing. So I think like the workload protection piece is such an interesting one, because it's breaking down these product barriers and starting to think about all of these problems holistically. And that's why Zero Trust is such a cool convergence with it, is now we're focusing on applying these set of principles to all of these different things.
So Satyam, I'm building out an application and I need a bunch of VMs and containers to run it, and one of them's controlling the database, and how do I protect all that with Zero Trust, rather instead of just putting firewalls in front of my network configurations?
No, so that's a very good question, Richard, because as we move to this cloud native world, what we imagine to be as our traditional web app database application, it is much more complex than that. There is the compute element running in virtual machines, in containers, in serverless environments. There is the storage element, which you are running in S3 buckets or Azure storage and so on. There is databases. There is other services. You may use machine learning from somewhere else. So you bring all those things together, and that's what makes an application now. And the challenge for the IT and security teams they are still looking at vendors who are giving container security, or who are giving database security or storage data encryption and things like that. And they need to solve the problem of securing this whole application, or securing even an environment. Maybe it's a compliance environment like PCI or something. So the right way to do this is to bring this all together and let it be. I think Rich brought up a very good point about identity-based controls, because you cannot no longer address these things which are not VMs and hosts as IPs and host names as we traditionally used to do. There are microservices, there are S3 buckets and so on that have to be addressed with their identity. And the second part, which has changed a lot to your question about firewalls, we used to control based on network ports and network IPs and subnets. We need to start controlling at API and API endpoints, because everything in this world is API and it's run over HTTPS. So controlling the port number is no longer any use or any meaningful use. So that is a different approach you have to take in the cloud native world. What we have seen in our experience is that most of the other technologies that enterprises are trying to use are still very much infrastructure centric and still very much dependent on the networks. And we really believe that is the right way to solve this. Again, as I said in the last question, it still brings up this challenge of how do you do it at scale when you have tens of thousands of microservices running in a large cloud environment. And that's where some of the learning engines, some of the policy confidence engines, and some of the capabilities of the platform need to come up to automate this for you. Because manually or trying to keep up with these dynamic and changing environments, it's just not possible anymore.
Hear, hear. Rich, I suspect you're in violent agreement with Satyam.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a bit, perhaps. So, I think of this like a lot of, folks in the security industry have been doing for some time in layers, right? So Alex talked a bit about shifting left and, applying security kind of pre-deploy, right? And so in these cloud environments you have, especially with kind of the DevOps centric culture that so many of them are, so many enterprises are adopting inside of their organizations, you have very much to think about everything from, the initial code being written all the way to production deployment. And across that kind of full life cycle, I think there's a couple of different layers where you need to be thinking about minimizing your attack surface in the interest of achieving a true zero trust strategy, right? One of the kind of the base foundational elements is all about, what does the posture of that environment look like? Whether you're looking, scanning infrastructure as code templates or some, production environment that's already deployed out to Azure as an example. Looking at things like the base configuration of the various services that are deployed, and even things like permissions, entitlements in these cloud infrastructures. Because if you look at cloud security incidents that we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, probably the most obvious ones have been all the exposed S3 buckets that still continue to plague enterprises for some reason. Poor choices around configuration in those cases have led to exposed attack surface and a way for bad actors of some sort to get in. So you start with kind of just the basics around hygiene for these cloud environments. And that actually is a way to reduce the attack surface and start to achieve zero trust. And then from there, the way that we look at it at Zscalar is, connectivity outside of these environments is absolutely critical. Right? If a workload needs access to the internet, or you're running an application server in Azure and it needs to connect to a database in your premises data center, there should be no exposed attack surface when doing that. Right? So if you can architect that connectivity in such a way that you're not advertising anything externally on the internet, you have not even exposed firewall to the internet, you've achieved a big step towards zero trust. So whether it's connectivity across cloud environments or back into your data center for a hybrid cloud type of architecture, or even within the cloud environment itself, what I was talking about before around things like identity-based microsegmentation, that helps reduce blast radius and helps to ensure that you are validating things like identity with every single connection point, right? So I think that, and then probably the last point is, users themselves. I think a lot of people in the industry, when they think of zero trust, they associate it almost immediately with remote user connectivity. And so, of course, users play a factor in workload connectivity as well. And that if users can't get access, whether it's developers or just end users of the application themselves, if they can't get access to these applications, then, well, you're probably too secure, right? So that kind of that part of the conversation comes into this as well. So you have these different layers and elements, all of which amount to a zero trust strategy for cloud workloads when taken in aggregate. And I think that's important, right? Zero trust is not, in my mind, it's not a tactic for remote access to applications. It's a strategy to be applied holistically across an entire environment, including the cloud workload environment that your organization deploys.
So, Alex, both Rich and Satyam alluded to scale and requirements for that. Give us a feel for the scale. Just, for years we've measured the size of an enterprise by number of employees, and then typically each employee had 2 devices, plus you had the data center. And that gave you a real picture of the scale of the infrastructure they had to deal with. What are scales looking like now in the cloud?
That's a really interesting question. I'm thinking about how best to give you that feel, and I almost want to just gravitate towards our own example of Microsoft and just talk. We've got this service, we've got Azure Security Center, which is of course a service for securing all of your Azure resources, and we have a pretty sizable engineering team that's just dedicated to securing all of Azure's resources for Microsoft as a customer itself. So I think if there's any testament to scale, it's the fact that even for Microsoft, we're making sure that all of our own resources are secured with a quite large organization.
Yeah, and Rich, Jay Chaudhary lets us all know that Zscalar's name meant zenith of scalability. What kind of scale are you seeing required in order to accomplish workload protection?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? I mean, it depends, and in the past it was easy, as like with user counts or employee counts, you could just take a look at the average size of organizations and figure this out, right? But here it really depends on two things: one, the industry, and then two, kind of the innovative nature of the organization themselves and how much they've really adopted a cloud first type of strategy and how much they're really kind of getting into this. So I'd say it's highly variable, right? We think there are around 250 million cloud workloads out there today, growing to about 400 or more over the next couple of years. So that's a pretty staggering number. The way that breaks down by industry or by organization itself is highly dependent on the organization. So it's hard to say, okay, someone in financial services will have this many cloud workloads, or healthcare will have this many. I mean, certainly there's certain industries like fintech or technology companies in general, certain types of industries that just gravitate towards the cloud, and it's such a core part of their business model to be innovative with things like applications and application development, that they have to stay ahead of these trends. Maybe in other industries not so much, but you still see outliers in both cases.
Yeah, I remember talking to an IT guy at one of the bigger theme park companies, and they had initiated, wristbands that you just pay for everything with, and they needed 8,000 VMs just to manage the application and the transactions involved with people spending money in line. So that can just give you a feel for how quickly it could expand, especially with elasticity. That 250 million number could double overnight, and it'd be great for Azure and Google Cloud and AWS But the thought of protecting all that in an elastic mode brings up the question. Satyam, can you build in that reactivity to an elastic workload environment, so each workload is spun up with all the same protections?
That's exactly right. And I wanted to comment on the previous one that
Sure.
In terms of scale, I think you bring a very big point that it is very elastic. We have some retailers as our customers, and their workloads go up almost 10x to sometimes even 12x on Thanksgiving and Christmas and those type of sales events. And suddenly they're, to your point, doing transactions, it's much, much higher. And to your other point, it is possible because now, because of AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, and so on. Previously, when you wanted to scale up, you will put in an order, get a couple of hardware servers shipped to your data center. You'll add those things, and it's months of process. Now it's happening in milliseconds. And some of our security tools and appliances are still following that older model of shipping more hardware to scale up. And that's just not, possible in this world where the applications and IT infrastructure and services scale up on demand and maybe scale up 10x or 20x. So I would say a couple of things there. One is you have to scale up and have your solution scale up to that, but there's also that human element of how much I can comprehend. And if you give me all the details, if you are showing me visually or in a table that these are all my containers and these are all my policies on them, it is not something that a human can comprehend when you have millions of containers running and seeing this in. So there's a couple of things you have to do. One is a very basic fundamental abstraction, such that you are giving an intent and identity-based policies to kind of, you describe it, and then the technologies problem or security technology problem to translate it into what it means for containers, VMs, S3 buckets, and so on. So that it's acting as a translation layer from the human intent, because that is something you can scale to and understand. This is what I want to do, and then how it gets done at the underlying infrastructure layer is between the technology. So that is one area. Beyond just how does it do it at 10 millions or 100 millions of workloads, that's another area. Another thing that's happened, and primarily because of zero trust world, is that previously we used to collect these data from these firewalls and events where something was bad or something violated a policy. Now in this zero trust world, we collect everything, every transaction that goes through our application, every service. So it's billions of records per second that is being generated even by a small or small to medium enterprise. And that's the amount of scale you have to build. And then there will be compliance requirements to keep it for years and stuff. And to your point, it's a lot of money for Azure's and AWS for that, but it is necessary to do such that you can actually provide the security and the learning and the automation that is necessary.
So now I'm worried that we're all building too big a case on how complex and difficult this problem is. Alex, walk us back a bit, and for the viewers listening, they're going to be worried that, oh my God, this is too big a problem. Too big to handle. How do you ease into this? Because if I know IT people, they like to walk before they run.
I totally understand, and I think Satyam brought up the key word I was thinking of, which is policy. We should be handling all the complexity for you behind the scenes, and your job should be creating those policies that tell us what you'd like to do. So both the inputs and the outputs to that, including who is the user, or what is accessing the resource ultimately, what kind of session are they coming from, how much risk does that session have, all the way to what are they accessing and what kind of sensitive data lives on there. So we can go study that data, we can learn it, we can feed it back into this continuous cycle, right? It's not some manual policy that sits there and never improves. It's feeding off of these trillions of signals that Satyam mentioned and becoming smarter every day about what access decisions should we allow to this resource, to this underlying data inside of that resource, etc. And letting us handle all that heavy lifting of understanding what you have where and how sensitive it is and how exposed it is the task that's on us as the vendors. And then for you, it's just defining those sets of policies that should make your life ultimately simpler.
I would agree with Alex if I can jump in on that. I mean, this is an opportunity to dramatically simplify the lives of folks in InfoSec and IT and DevOps, right? People have not known for years what their policies, their firewall policies even mean. Some of the organizations, talk to organizations with hundreds of thousands of policies built in their firewalls, and they don't change them because they don't know what's going to happen if they do. They have no idea what the underlying concept is, right? And so when you can switch from this like impossible for a human to understand, ACL, like port and IP kind of model, to, hey, this application server talks to this database, or this user can get access to this application, this user cannot. Now all of a sudden you're expressing policy language in human readable, sort of more business level policies that make sense to people. And so yes, maybe there's a lot of complication. All the other vendors in this ecosystem are providing models that abstract that away from what the human needs to interact with. And so it's exactly the opposite of what you asked, Richard. This is an opportunity for simplification rather than for additional complexity.
Yeah, and you all talked about identity being core to this, and that is, one constant within an organization, right? You know your employees, you eventually know your contractors and partners, hopefully you know your customers. So at least you've got that central basis, and it's something you need anyways, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right? I think I saw a stat the other day that, and I can't remember where it's from, but the average container lives for less than, or half of all containers live for less than 10 minutes, right? It's something along those lines, right? And so, with that level of sort of dynamic and ephemeral kind of workload, you have to build policies based on identity, because there's these containers and other kind of services popping up all over the place and then, disappearing quickly. And if you're trying to manage that, the next layer down with network layer types of policies, it just doesn't work. I mean, those are fundamentally static policies trying to be force fit into a dynamic world, and it doesn't work. It just completely falls apart. So identity is absolutely core to achieving these goals. Even if forget zero trust even for a moment, just if you're trying to secure anything in the kind of this dynamic cloud environment, identity is a must-have.
Got it. Alex, I have to ask, because I know if I'm an IT buyer and I'm interested in protecting my workloads, if I go to Rich or Satyam, they will sell me a multi-cloud solution. What if I do I only go to Microsoft if I'm just on Azure?
Absolutely not. I think we'd be laughed out of the market if that was the case. So, of course, I think Microsoft's strategy in general across beyond just workloads, but of course for workloads as well, is that we can protect the things that are native to Microsoft with 1 or 2 click integrations or behind the scenes things that you don't have to set up. But we absolutely do and have to and want to protect multi-cloud environments, because that's the reality even for Microsoft. All of our customers, including ourselves, are running all of these different workloads across multiple clouds. And so what that means is we've got ways we can integrate behind the scenes for our homegrown solutions, but we're also offering protections for AWS, for GCP, and for other major cloud workloads as well.
Got it. Yeah, and Satyam, in your customer base, do you see most customers having a multi-cloud solution?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's almost a no-brainer now. Most customers are migrating firstly from their data centers, so they already have data centers, and moving rapidly to cloud. And for whatever different reasons, business reasons and technology reasons, they have multiple clouds. And a lot of times, I think Rich mentioned that earlier, it's a DevOps and application-driven environment. So different application developers and different DevOps people have comfort with different clouds. So they go with different based on their expertise. Some of the teams will pick Google, and some will pick Azure, and some will pick AWS. And that's just a normal thing. And to your point, having a policy and console which stays consistent across is a huge reason why they go with vendors outside what's given in the cloud. But I feel some of the things that clouds do natively are also because they want to do a segregation from that. They are not looking inside the application, and they are sort of keeping away from it, which they cannot offer because they are not looking inside your Kubernetes workloads by intent. And that's what some of the vendors like us are able to actually do, because we are really looking to do security in there, as opposed to trying to maintain that segregation between the workloads.
Hey guys, this has been fantastic, but let's wrap up. Rich, any last thoughts on protecting workloads in the cloud?
I guess I'll summarize with the fact that I think for a lot of folks in IT and InfoSec, the move to the cloud has meant a lot of change, and perhaps this feeling of some loss of control, especially as kind of the center of gravity shift more towards development and DevOps. But I think that's opportunity as well. For the folks listening in on this to impact change in a very big way and result in more secure environments, a closer collaboration with development and the DevOps teams, as well as infusion of policies into production environments, leads to a much more secure environment overall, because now you're finding things before they're deployed into production, and you continue to maintain that strong security posture. So I think this is the move to cloud is nothing but opportunity for InfoSec folks. It does mean a different way of doing business and some slight changes to culture, but it should be an exciting time ahead for everyone starting we're continuing on this journey.
That's for sure. Alex, any last words?
Yeah, I totally echo what Rich said. I think the opportunity in front of us is awesome. And I mentioned at the beginning that things used to be in silos, and to some extent they still are, but those are coming down. And I think both Zero Trust and sort of this digital revolution are chiefly responsible for those things. The same concepts apply across everything that we're trying to protect. We talked about policy management and identity, and everything has an identity. And I think it's awesome that even we're here across the industry now talking about these things, and it's actually symbolic for a bunch of different integrations we do even across vendor in the market. So I think our goal is to make things easier, like we talked about a bit earlier, for our customers, for our users. And we'll be doing all the sort of the opportunity here to leverage the cloud to make things easier by taking on a lion's share of the responsibility of doing that data processing for them, I think is awesome and tremendous, and customers should be excited about it.
Yeah, I like the way the Zero Trust vendors I talk to, they'll point out the silos and how they're going away, but in their own language, they describe planes, right? Control planes and enforcement planes and all the rest. And planes cut across all of that. So it's just a better language that we're using.
Absolutely.
And Satyam, any last words?
Yeah, I would come back to the workload and Zero Trust. I think we have tried a lot of different approaches in trying to do security, which was threat centering with antiviruses and firewalls and so on. We can go through the list of hundreds of products. This is the time where we have to accept that doing the workloads, we are doing it with Zero Trust, and this is the opportunity to get it right at the right time before we start using those same old technologies and trying to solve this problem. We talked about scale, we talked about disruption, and some of the challenges that traditional security models bring. And I would just like to highlight it at the end that Zero Trust is the right approach.
Great. I want to thank you guys so much and encourage our viewers to see everybody's demos. This is your chance to really get into the weeds and see these things in action. So once again, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.